people to speak on items not on the agenda. If anybody would like to address the commission now on items not on the agenda, this is your opportunity. Seeing none, we'll go back to the consent calendar. And the only item there is the September 24th, 2019 minutes. If we don't have any corrections, do we have a motion for approval?
So move to approve the minutes.
Do we have a second on that?
I second.
Okay, moved and seconded. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
One abstention. And we can jump right into our first public hearing of the evening, and that is to adopt Resolution PC 1905, recommendation the City Council amend the Land Use Code, adding a mobile home park combining zone to various mobile home parks. And we have a staff report.
Yeah, good evening, Commissioners. This item before you tonight is a redo of an item we recently held. You recall at your Planning Commission meeting 2 meetings ago, we brought this draft ordinance forward for a recommendation of the City Council. On the City Council's direction, City Council then reviewed at the meeting subsequent to your Planning Commission whether to move forward with the original direction given by the Council or the direction given by the Planning Commission at that meeting, which was effectively to hold off on introducing this ordinance and wait until there's additional information on a senior mobile home park overlay zone and to have additional considerations of what longer range planning efforts might be that would affect the Arcata Trailer Court, as those two items were of import to the community. At the subsequent City Council hearing, we presented the deliberations, as best we could without having a formal resolution that the Planning Commission had made and the issues raised by the public. Public were also there to present their concerns directly to the City Council. And we did review and evaluate the idea of continuing the matter until the other issues of senior mobile home overlay zoning and additional planning for the Gateway Corridor could be completed versus moving forward with this first step to adopt the mobile home exclusive overlay zone. And the council directed staff and the Planning Commission to review this item now and that we would come back around to those other items later. And in part, this was predicated on the efforts that the department is doing to accomplish not just the other current planning workload that we have in the department, but also moving on to other goals and objectives that the council had set in its work priorities for the department, as well as because the introduction of the moratorium ordinances outlined an urgent need, and this addresses those urgent needs. And so after that hearing, staff then noticed this public hearing, separate notice for this public hearing, since we didn't continue to a date certain, and have brought this resolution before you again tonight. Because of the timing and again, the council's direction to bring this to them as soon as possible, I had already noticed before your hearing could be heard on the matter the first time around, I had already noticed the council's hearing date so that they could take up an introduction of this ordinance. And they have since, that was originally set for October 2nd, they have since continued that item to their October 16th meeting date. And, that's the reality of the situation. That's no pressure on the Planning Commission. Certainly, if you need an additional meeting between now and then, we can continue again at the City Council. But my objective would be to have the resolution adopted tonight. So I am just now, unfortunately, just now noticing that the resolution is not included in your packet. Does any of you have the resolution in your packet? I don't know if it got... The ordinance is included. The resolution is Resolution PC 1905. And if you will give me a moment, I will bring up Resolution PC 1905. It hasn't changed. The ordinance itself has changed, but the resolution has not changed since your... Yeah, apparently something got left out of the packet. So it's Resolution 1905, which I will bring up on screen for you, which has as attachment to it the Exhibit 1, which is ordinance number XXXX. It hasn't been assigned an ordinance number yet, which starts on packet page 8. So while we make this resolution available, I'll start going into detail on what the changes are to the ordinance. Okay, so at the last council hearing, we had, among many of the other discussion items substantive to the proposed or draft ordinance, we discussed some minor matters associated with, for example, the labeling on the map. So I'll draw your attention to packet page 12, Exhibit 1. We've made the recommended additions, adding both the name, the address, and the APN to the identified sites, which include the Town and Country Valley West, Lazy J, Arcata Mobile Home Park, and Sandpiper Mobile Home Park. Again, this ordinance does not have the Arcata Trailer Court included, and that was at the council's direction. There were some other moderately substantive changes that we made. There was a good input from the community that identified that one of the first sentences in the purpose might better belong in the applicability section, so we've changed that. And then there was some discussion on the rezoning requirements under sub D, and that's shown on packet page 9. This section essentially outlines additional findings that would need to be made above and beyond the standard findings for a zone amendment to change the zoning for a mobile home park combining zone. And so unlike any other zone change, zone amendment that can happen within the city of Arcata, where you make the standard general plan conformance, public safety and health determinations, this one had two additional findings that would have to be made. The first is that the requirements of the mobile home closure and conversion ordinance had been satisfied and approved by the city council. And so you can't even come in for a zone amendment to change the zoning on a mobile home park until after a closure and conversion ordinance has been, closure and conversion relocation and other reports have been completed. Last time I'd given you a link to the reference for that the draft mobile home closure and conversion ordinance. And again, this is not under review by the Planning Commission tonight, but I did include that ordinance in your packet. And so beginning on packet page 13, you'll see ordinance number 1515, which is a closure and conversion ordinance. And so the detail associated with what's required to meet the mandates of that closure and conversion ordinance are there for your review. The council, I affirmed in their direction, is not asking you to review that and make a formal recommendation. because there were some concerns about you making decisions with reference to this ordinance and that you didn't have it in your packet. I've included it. And also in the, the meeting 2 meetings ago, I included a link so you have access to that. I will say that this ordinance is still in draft form. There's the 1515 ordinance. There's quite a bit of discussion with the council and the community as to what the requirements of ordinance 1515 will ultimately be. There was some public comment that was included in your packets that addressed some changes that were desired on some of these ordinances as well. And so we're still working through those, and there's still some research that the council has asked staff and the city attorney to provide to them before they adopt ordinance 1515. So it's not 100% in final form yet, but what you're reviewing here in this packet is essentially the companion ordinance, the requirements that would be implemented before any closure or conversion could happen on a mobile home park. Part of that closure and conversion ordinance is the relocation benefits that are mandated by our ordinance and replicated in state law. This is one of the issues of particular concern amongst mobile home owners who feel that the ordinance doesn't go far enough, and they pointed to several examples where communities have adopted more stringent or more exacting relocation benefits. I can tell you that this matter is not 100% resolved at this point, but that we did receive legal guidance not just from our city attorney, but from William Constantine on this matter, who's an expert in the field of mobile home ordinances, both respecting closure and conversion and the site rent limitations. And we have both of those types of ordinances in the works. So I give you that additional detail to really draw your attention to the fact that the subsection D1, even though it's a single sentence, it really has a lot of teeth behind it that are embedded in Ordinance 1515.
What page are you on there?
Which page is that on?
Yeah.
The Ordinance 1515 begins on page 13, packet page 13. And subsection D1 begins on packet page 9. It reads, all of the requirements of the City of Arcata Mobile Home Closure and Conversion Ordinance, including relocation, have been satisfied and approved by the City Council. So in order to do a zone change, the Planning Commission would have to find and make a recommendation to the City Council that the closure and conversion ordinance requirements had been satisfied already, that the City Council had already confirmed that those requirements were met. Still on packet page 9, D2, another finding that is required here is that replacement housing totaling 15% of the total spaces converted are included for low-income residents in a new housing project on that subject site, or an in lieu fee determined by multiplying the calculated total of 15% of the converted spaces by the per unit replacement value using the most recent affordable housing project built in the city valuation adjusted for inflation. The in lieu fee must be deposited in a restricted city account to build affordable housing. The discussion on this last time, essentially left that percentage to your discretion. To give a little more background as to why we chose 15%, it's largely because that is the standard percentage for low-income inclusionary zoning in the city's housing programs. And it's a pretty typical, percentage for the proportion of housing units that are anticipated to be affordable to residents in a mixed income project. And so it's not to say that there were only 15% of the persons living in that mobile home park that were in fact low income, but that was the rationale for starting with 15%. I want to be real clear, this element hasn't been tested. I don't know that there's an example in law anywhere else in the state of California or in the United States that has this kind of requirement for a replacement of affordable housing or an in lieu fee paid in light of it or in spite of it. So this was an attempt to go over and above all of the other requirements that are already embedded in our Ordinance 1515, the closure and conversion ordinance, and any other requirements for relocation and replacement housing. I am not confident, or certain, I should say. I'm confident that we're attempting to include this, but I'm not certain that it will remain in the ultimate ordinance. But it's certainly something that the commission should, apply its deliberations to, whether or not that 15% is too low, and we can get into, discussions about how that may or may not affect the market associated with that. And so I want to be real clear is that this 15%, there was a confusion last time, I think, that this 15% replacement housing is not intended to replace the people who are living on the site that's being converted. All of the people that were on that site that's being converted would have received a relocation benefit consistent with the closure and conversion ordinance, and hopefully have been relocated to places that are still affordable for them. The closure and conversion ordinance puts a pretty high bar for a landowner to prove that there are relocatable locations for these people and that are being displaced. But I wanted to be real clear, and that what seemed like may have been a confusion is that the intent is not to directly rehouse people who are being displaced by a relocation. The other point I wanted to make was that these ordinances that we're adopting, these are very preemptive. No one has been talking about closing or converting a mobile home park. For all intents and purposes, a lot of the testimony that was provided both by the public and that we received from professional organizations indicate that mobile home parks are a highly profitable venture, and there is no drive at this point to large-scale convert mobile home housing. We did adopt a space rent limitation in the city of Arcata. We have a stabilization ordinance, and the study that predated that predicated a lot of the findings that were made in order to adopt that program, identified and indicated that the mobile home rents are not seeing those sort of rapid rates of increase that we're seeing in lots of other areas of the state where mobile home parks are undergoing extreme gentrification. That's not to say that the mobile home parks were not receiving rent increases that mobile home owners themselves, individual mobile home owners, didn't feel were out of pace with their personal finances. But it's just a point to, we don't have market indications right now that there's a large push towards closure and conversion. And so we are doing all of these things very preemptively, and I believe that we have a fairly good start at this point of putting together both a land use and a closure and conversion, which would be housed in the Arcata Municipal Code, companion ordinances that will work to preserve mobile home housing, which is by all means very highly affordable market rate housing.
Can I just ask, did we find PC 1905?
I believe we did. So this is the same Planning Commission resolution that was in your packet last time for your meeting 2 meetings ago on September 10th. The resolution itself has not been modified at all. And so keep this up on the screen for a bit. But what we're proposing to do is to take PC Resolution 1905 that was included in your September 10 packet and replace the attachment with ordinance number XXXX shown in your packet today, packet page 8 through 12.
Just a question on on D2 on packet page 9, the part you were just talking about, David. So that's, I guess it's a continuation of that first sentence. It says, the in lieu would be multiplying the 15% of the converted spaces by the per unit replacement value. So, like, what does that look like? Is that something like where you figure out the cost per square foot to build that kind of stuff? And then, so let's say those units are, 1,000 square feet kind of thing, and it's 150, so 150,000 each, something like that. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, the city has a long record of partnering with various developers to produce affordable housing. And we have a fairly good bead on what it costs to produce that kind of housing. This would be wholesale, totally different kind of housing though. And so we're not talking about what does it cost to build a mobile home park, which is relatively simplistic. You put some infrastructure in the ground, you put a pedestal, and then it's up to the owners of the mobile home to come in and put the rest of the foundation work and connect to those pedestals, which is part of the reason why it's highly profitable. The property owner who receives the rents doesn't have much input. The majority of the value is put in by the property owners who bring those mobile homes to the site. So we wouldn't be looking at what does it cost to replace a mobile home unit. What we'd be looking at is if you want to convert your property from a mobile home park and put in a, let's say a mixed-use building or a mid-rise building or something to that effect, and you're going to do housing there. Our first objective would be to ensure that you include a component that is affordable housing. And so 15% of the units that you removed, we want to see that number of units go back in as affordable housing in your building so that people don't get completely displaced from the site permanently. Secondary, a fallback position would be that if you're not willing to put affordable housing into your project, that you're going to pay what we know the burden rate for producing affordable housing with our program. So that includes prevailing wage and all the other add-ons that come with doing affordable housing. So in this way, what we're hoping is that difference, that cost differential, will drive people to want to include affordable housing in their projects as opposed to just pay to play and not have to replace that affordable housing. And there are lots of reasons for that, including dispersing the housing, not having clusters of low-income units and so on and so forth. We can get into those.
Okay, thank you.
I have a couple of questions. So regarding specifically the Arcata trailer court, so will they receive relocation benefits? And how exactly does that work? I mean, it's like a 12-month, I think I kind of understand it, but what happens after 12 months?
Yeah, this is part of the reason why the relocation benefit is, not the best solution to, to permanent relocation. The way that it's designed in the programs that we run, that we operate, if we had a grant program, there's a longer period of time the relocation benefit lasts, but all of these relocation programs, if there's a benefit that's associated with that, that benefit expires at some point. And so if you take someone who's, in the case of the mobile home surveys that we submitted or requested for our study, our mobile home study, a large proportion of people are paying 50% of their income towards their rent, just their space rent. So if you take someone who's paying 50% of their income towards space rent at a affordable market rate, we found that many of those space rents are actually less than what our space rent is at regulated parks like Sandpiper and Arcata Mobile Home Park. And then you take them and you relocate them to an apartment, which maybe costs $200, $300, $400 more a month. Even if you give them a relocation benefit that bridges the difference between their original rent and that increased rent, when the relocation benefit runs out, they now have a $300, $400 rent increase that they can't afford. So it's not the greatest alternative, is what it boils down to. And the city of Arcata has, consistently worked with its affordable housing providers to ensure that we're developing as much affordable housing as we possibly can. And we're certainly doing better than most in the region in terms of meeting those objectives. Now, when it comes to the park that, is not covered under this ordinance, they would still be subject to Ordinance 1515. So the closure and conversion ordinance still applies. They would still, if the park owner there wanted to convert Arcata Trailer Court to some other use, they would still have to submit the conversion report. They'd still have to provide the relocation benefit. They'd still have to go through all of this process before they could apply for the zone change to, or I'm sorry, in that case, they wouldn't have the zone change, but all of those same legal requirements apply to them. In the case of Arcata Trailer Court, now, they're, as I'd mentioned last time, they're in the Arcata Gateway, specific area planning area. Those documents have not been solidified yet. But what I can tell you is that the approach that we're taking with this specific area plan is that it's a public-private partnership where we're going out and working with interested parties to increase the value of their properties, to bring mixed use, mixed income, mixed occupancy developments to that core near the downtown area that has the potential for redevelopment. That's the objective that we're shooting for. The specific details on each and every parcel have not yet been worked out, but there are going to be parcel-specific requirements and or parcel-specific incentives that we'll be developing. And so right now, the owner of the Arcata Trailer Court has never expressed any interest in converting the park. They run and operate the park as a very low at very low rents. They continue to maintain and manage the park in satisfactory condition. But there is no question that that is some of the lowest end housing stock that we have in the city of Arcata. If there's an ability to, and there's no incentive for that person to change their use right now. The property is making money. So there's no financial interest for them to invest money into a property when it's already making good money for them. In order for that property to even be considered for conversion, the city would have to do something to make it so valuable, the land so valuable, the conversion prospects so valuable that that landowner who's now making good money on that property starts to think about either themselves doing a project or selling the project to someone who would do a project, right? Well, on that particular property, and again, I'm sort of thumbnail sketching what the staff recommendation would be. We haven't gone through the public process yet. We haven't adopted these policies or documents, but this is what we're seeing out into the future. On that particular property, we would probably work with that landowner to build a mixed income project. So we would be looking to include probably even a more robust relocation benefit than is afforded by Ordinance 1515. And just like we did with the Sandpiper Mobile Home Park, we would try and do that relocation before the people would be affected negatively by the project. We'd be working to do relocation well in advance of the project and ensuring that the project is viable, fiscally viable through that time frame.
Is this, okay, so this is the reason why you didn't want the Arcata Trailer Court to be included in this, because you wanted to give incentive for that owner to provide some other type of housing.
That is the conversation that we've been having for the last 2 years, rough outline. We haven't talked in great detail about that particular property, but yeah, that's the incentive model that we're talking about.
Okay, so when it comes to the Arcata Trailer Court, when that time comes, is the city going to help those tenants find housing, and not just housing they can afford? I mean, when you're talking about in here providing, you're going to help them with their hookups and help them move and kind of give them the difference between their old rent and their new rent for the next 12 months. But I'm worried about after those 12 months are up, if they can't afford it, they can't afford it. So hopefully we can get them, you guys can get them, or the city can get them into something that is sustainable. After 12 months, they can still afford it with their income without having to move again in 12 months.
That would be desirable. Unfortunately, our programs are designed, fortunately or unfortunately, however you look at it, our programs are designed around, sort of averages. We have to use, statistics to determine, what the income levels are and, what the benefits would be and what the rents would be. We don't look at each individual's income situation once they move into a place. Right now, we have a tenant-based rental assistance program, which was also another outcome of the mobile home study. That tenant-based rental assistance program is a 2-year commitment to assist Arcata residents with their rents. We're currently full. We don't have new openings on that program. It filled up very quickly thanks to some dedicated and committed time put in by city staff. But the majority of those folks in that program are living in rent-restricted units in the city of Arcata. The majority of the folks who qualified for the program had the right rental ratios and all of the elements necessary to both qualify for the program and be able to use that assistance are in already existing rent-restricted units. Some of these people are still, even though they're in rent-restricted units, paying 50, 60, 70% of their income towards their rent. The situation is dire out there for many people. There's no question about that. Neither of these ordinances addresses that dire nature. The additional assistance that the city would provide in my absolute best case scenario world, where we would work with the owner of Arcata Trailer Court and continue to work towards securing grant funding or using our local housing funds to ensure that there was good relocation benefits and that there was provision for affordable housing on the site when it gets redeveloped, if it gets redeveloped. Even through all those efforts, I am absolutely confident that the people who are going to qualify for those units are unfortunately going to be highly qualified. They're going to be very low income, paying a low income rate, or they're going to be extremely low income, paying a low income rate. And they'll be overburdened by rent, even though they're in rent restricted units. So I know that's a little long-winded, but the direct answer to your question is I can't really commit to anything formally right now. I mean, that's a process that'll happen down the road, but that's what we intend to do. There's still going to be a lot of need at the very end of all of those efforts, and we'll continue to do the best we can to bring quality projects to the city of Arcata. I think housing quantity and housing quality are important issues that we need to address.
While we're on this topic, does the city still have partnership in Arcata Bay Crossing? And are there any projects like that on the horizon?
Arcata Bay Crossing, we have a loan with them and a regulatory agreement, but that's the extent of our partnership. We don't assist in the management or maintenance of the property. But we do continue to look to build those new partnerships. The most recent one was the Isaacson's Affordable Housing Project, where we're effectively doing the same partnering that we did with Housing Humboldt on the Arcata Bay Crossings project.
And so those projects are very specifically an attempt with state grants, city efforts to create housing for low-income and very low-income housing needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are very purposeful and intentful Herculean efforts to work with the funding agencies in this post-redevelopment world where we have to make every local dollar stretch even farther to get those units created.
And that's all part of our regional housing needs assessment. Is that what it's called? RENA?
It absolutely is, and we'll delve into that topic in a lot more detail in our next item. But yeah, it absolutely is. It's one of the mechanisms that we've been using to be successful at meeting those regional housing needs.
So a consideration along those lines is if Arcata Bay Crossing 28 units disappears, that hopefully these other projects continue to fill that need. And then there's the discussion about the gap funding challenge, which we can't solve all of this, but the goal is to meet those needs as often as possible with new housing opportunities, huh?
Yes.
Okay. Were you done with your staff report? Are we jumping the gun on our questions?
Yeah, no, I am.
So let's continue with questions and comments.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did want to just mention, I kind of mentioned it by way of just in passing, but attachment C includes the correspondence from the public that you received on this item. I'm sorry, I also wanted to mention that I did receive correspondence that I believe it came in on last Wednesday that I just discovered today in my inbox. I did email that correspondence to you. We'll upload it to Minute Track. We'll append it to the staff report. That correspondence addressed changes to the ordinance 1515, which again is not under your purview.
Is that this that was on the counter?
That is not what was on the counter.
Okay. John, were you going to?
Yeah. I just want to make sure I have a clear understanding of the mobile home park overlay zoning ordinance and the conversion ordinance, particularly with reference to the Arcata Trailer Court. And in the mobile home park combining zone, we have the two findings that you talked about. One of them is that they would have to comply with the conversion ordinance, and then you have the 15% replacement rate. If we leave the Arcata Trailer Court off of the list of mobile home parks that are zoned with that overlay, will both of those stipulations apply? You've indicated that the conversion ordinance would apply, but does the 15% replacement also apply somehow?
No, it would not.
Okay. If we were to include the Arcata Trailer Court in the list of mobile home parks that are covered by the overlay zoning, what would be the practical result of that in terms of what the development of that property?
I'm sorry, if you did not include it or if you did include it?
I probably didn't explain that well. If it were included, it would be obvious it would be covered by the two findings. If it were not included, the conversion ordinance would apply to it, but not the 15% replacement requirement.
Correct.
So I'm just trying to figure out what the justification is for leaving it off the list. I get that we have future zoning and plans in mind, but I just don't see why it's not on the list.
I guess the two primary reasons that I would offer are that, one, this ordinance, the proposed ordinance, the draft ordinance that you're reviewing for the overlay zoning, is intended to be a disincentive. It's intended to be an obstacle to conversion. And the Arcata Trailer Court is a site that we've identified as a site we'd like to see converted. So those two things run counter to one another, and because we've been talking about trying to find ways to incentivize that property, creating a disincentive doesn't seem to make sense. Now, the city could always change its mind in the future. The city could decide to remove that and then adopt a statement of overriding consideration with an EIR because it's inconsistent to remove that requirement for that one particular park. So there would be a process But I guess what I would offer is that you and the council are the decision makers who are making a decision now based on your best understanding of the facts and the situation on the ground as it is and our current planning scenario. And so for you to potentially, bind the hands of future planning commissions or future councils may not be the wisest, planning decision, in particular because you know that you're planning something to the contrary. And so both those things are related in a sense, but the one has more practical facets, the other has more, process facets, I guess. You're making the decision now if you think that's the decision that ought to be made, and that we want to continue to pursue conversion and rehabilitation and reuse, reimagining the site that's on our Arcata Gateway, then you should plan for it now in all of the actions that you take.
Can I just also throw out, isn't it made clear that the city council wants that park not included, and that they ultimately will be voting on and passing whatever we put to them?
They did, but I do want to reiterate that you're a separate body appointed by them to make recommendations, and so you should let your deliberations, guide ultimately that recommendation.
If I may, Chair, I just want to, I passed out Resolution 1905, and it's just the first three pages. The attachment that goes along with that resolution would be the attachment A of your staff report packet. It would be the proposed draft ordinance for the city council to consider for the mobile home combining zone.
I did review the council meeting where they discussed this, their last meeting, where they talked about this, and I didn't see anybody speaking to the fundamental reason for leaving the Arcata Trailer Court off the list. As David says, there's a certain amount of disincentive involved with having to provide for 15% replacement. I don't know how much of a disincentive that would really be. It kind of looks to me like the Arcata Trailer Court is probably the only one of the existing mobile home parks that would even tempt someone to make the investment that be required, considering the provisions in the conversion ordinance. And I'm just having a hard time talking myself into the proposition that it's a fair practice for us to leave it off of the list of mobile home parks, and would be the only one without the overlay zoning.
Okay, anything else? Other questions, clarifications? Joe, can you help clarify? We are asked to adopt resolution PC 1905. You just pointed out that the attachment A ordinance XXXX is included in that, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Well, Commission, we need to continue deliberating or look for a motion.
Open to the public.
Oh, sorry. Or open it up to the public. Thank you, Judith. My protocol's off tonight. Thank you, Julie. All right, so at this point, let's open this up to the public for public comment.
Ananda Hazard, and I live in the Lazy J. And I currently serve as the president of the Arcata Lazy J Homeowners Association. I really appreciate this process that we are going through, and I want to give a little bit of my background so you can understand, I think, what affects me and maybe other people in the park as well. My working career started when I was 15, and I just turned 70 last June, and I'm now fully retired. My direct livelihood was 40 years of full-charge bookkeeping, 20 of which was running my own company, which is still in existence, but I'm just in the background now. I have a BA in cultural anthropology and lots of life experience since I completed my degree. I thought my retirement would be a pleasant time of less responsibilities and concerns. Lots of freedom, something I aspire to, that would involve more ease. Probably many of us here had or have a similar goal and expectations, but it's not currently so for many of us. In December of 2014, I began the process of purchasing my home in the Lazy J Ranch, moving in the middle of January of 15, and which makes me into my 5th year, and this is the first home I've ever owned. I did not expect to be having so many concerns about the cost of paying higher and higher space rent and facing issues regarding not only the over 55 status of the park, but also sizable costs possibly being added for capital repairs, let alone capital improvements. I had heard some of these issues about them before I purchased the house, so I didn't like come into it and then have a big surprise. So you're here today to begin the process of really affecting a lot of lives in the city of Arcata, not just in the park I live in, but the other parks. And it's a tough decision. I realize that. And I appreciate that there's time concern. And I think there was some confusion in the packet from one of the comments that got included to you by a park resident, thinking that, David, you cleared this up when you said 1515 is not, it's where it is. It doesn't include some of the recommended changes and contemplative changes. I'm also assisting the ordinance in effect has a homeowner's representative, and myself and 2 other people sit with Nancy Pelletier, who is the homeowner's representative for the rent ordinance, and we'll be meeting with David later in the month here. And I think there was a bit of, I understood more here tonight than from what was in the packet, that the 1515 you have is not going to, hopefully not be the final version. Because I think there's some language, even from the editing that was presented at the last commission meeting here. So you can tell me later why that wasn't part of what you submitted today, so I can understand that. Okay. Okay. Well, the other comment I wanted to make is we're not a significant majority of the residents of Arcata, but I believe that everyone deserves representation, including business owners. But I question the fear that I sense is happening because of the non-resident corporation who has so much influence on how we are able to stay in our homes. Because of with increasing rent and wanting, to have capital repairs and improvements that we feel should be paid for out of the rent that we've already paid. And I know I'm just trying to expand the bigger picture of what I hope you will contemplate during, as part of this process that you're going to. And all of us have had elders and have elders who helped us become who we are today. And we should respect them and honor them as much as possible in the considerations and actions on these issues before you tonight. I wanted to read my more not so nervous comment on what's going on here. And I look forward to seeing what you all do. Thank you.
Bring it down to 5-foot level. 411. Hello, commissioners and staff. My name's Lynn Matthews. I live at the Lazy J Arcata Senior Mobile Home Park. This is Linda Dirksen. She couldn't make it tonight. This is her letter, and I'd like to read it into the record if that's okay with you. Is that okay with Commission?
Yes, help yourself.
Thank you. So Linda and her husband, Jan, both live at the Arcata Lazy J Senior Mobile Home Park. And again, she's not able to make it tonight. She's not feeling good. The amount of written material she submitted to your agenda package for this meeting might seem overwhelming. It's quite your package. I hope you've gotten that. However, this material was meant to be spread over the next 19-month moratorium months and not compressed into one meeting. The City Council has never asked for an accelerated schedule like this one. We don't know why the city staff has decided on such a highly accelerated schedule. It seems to us that neither the draft mobile home park exclusive zone overlay ordinance nor the mobile home park closure conversion ordinance is ready for adoption. We don't know if there's a way that you can slow down the staff's headlong scheduling of these two ordinances or not. At the City Council's May 1st, 2019 meeting, the council was dissatisfied with the staff closure conversion ordinance 1515 that is included in tonight's agenda package. The council member Patino said, "I completely agree that we hold back on the 1515. Attached is a copy of September 11th, 2019 notice in the Mad River Union announcing the City Council would adopt the exclusive zone overlay on October 2nd. Of course, that adoption never happened. That's why the zone overlay ordinance is on your agenda tonight. One last thing, just to make this point, please be aware that the closure conversion ordinance that is included in your agenda package tonight is identical to the one that the council was unhappy with at the May 1st meeting this year, and that the staff withdrew from the council's consideration at that meeting because it needed so many changes. Only one minor change in the numbering has been made so far to the draft since May 1st. The closure conversion ordinance is at the heart of the zoning overlay ordinance and is cited in the overlay ordinance as the key item in section 9.28.140.d.1. It would not be wise for you to approve the zoning overlay ordinance until the closure conversion ordinance has been rewritten, deliberated, and adopted. Thank you for your consideration to our comments.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Good evening. My name is Carmen Gentile. I'm a resident of the Lazy J Mobile Home Park. I'm here to add another human face to the mobile home park population. And I ask that when the commission reviews your weighty decisions, that you consider that in every ordinance, statute, and law, there's the letter of the law and there's the spirit of the law. And if you get caught up in the legalese and then the long jargon, I invite you to sit back and review what the intent of these laws are. Government is instituted to protect those who are most vulnerable. People don't decide to move into a mobile home park. We end up in a mobile home park because the cost of housing is so inflated. And we are a particularly vulnerable population. I thank you. I know the work you do is challenging and often thankless, but I hereby thank you for your service and for your audience.
Thank you.
My name is Hillary Mosier, and I don't live in Lazy J. I actually live in a mobile home park in McKinleyville. I am, however, a small business owner here in Arcata. I own a small preschool. And within my preschool is a program called the Street Relief Preschool. And it's for children whose families are homeless. And it's for, we also have children who go from homelessness to being housed, and some of them go into the mobile home parks. I want to say that statistically, there are approximately 731 mobile homes in the city of Arcata. That's fairly significant. There are approximately 600 non-mobile home, low-income houses or housing in the city of Arcata. So the mobile homes actually outstrip them significantly. And they, for the most part, with the exception of, I think, of about 27 units, are non-subsidized. And a big difference between other low-income housing, and in the discussion today, it was a little disconcerting because the people in Arcata who are in low-income housing, who are not in parks, are in apartments. They don't own them. If their sink drips, they call up and say, I got a drippy sink, come fix it. We got to pay some guy. I go on Craigslist and find some guy and keep my fingers crossed and hope he knows what he's doing, because he doesn't guarantee his work. Our water heater blows, we got to buy ourselves a new water heater. You remember these, you probably all got some too recently. We got to pay taxes on our property, just like any other property owner. And you know, that's fairly significant. I don't know about everybody else, I'm paying about $400 a year. And you times that 731 times, that's a significant income to the city of Arcata. And when you think about it, there's 6 property owners. None of them live in Arcata. They don't vote in Arcata. And when I'm looking at these closure conversion writings, I mean, I know David says that he consulted with outside attorney and the local attorney, but I represent this area for the state of California, for the Golden State Manufactured Homeowners League. We're an all-volunteer organization, and we represent all the mobile home owners in parks across the state. And I get a little bit of a satellite view of what's going on. And everything that I read that's been written for these overlays and for this closure conversion is what we see being written by park owners' lawyers. I mean, they're almost verbatim down the line, and it's curious. And what I've seen, because I come to these meetings, and if I can't come, I'll watch them on TV, and what I see is that the council is asking again and again, can you take these back? Can you bring them back with more resident-friendly language, please? 15% is, what, 3 houses? 3 people at Arcata Trailer Park are going to be offered housing out of 27 homes. And now there's nobody here from that park. And I was here last time and I told you why. I've gone down there and I've talked to them. One guy I talked to almost 15 years ago. He's been there, he's still there. That's where he lives, that's his home. It's a single wide. It's, you know, I don't even think I could live there. I live in a mobile home, but it's a double wide with 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. It's got over 1,000 square feet. He would want fair market value, just like you would want for your home, just like I want for my home. My home sells at this point, I think I could probably get $85,000 to $90,000 for it. That's fair market value. That's what we all want for our homes. Enclosure conversion, that's what we should be looking at. I need more than 90 days to get my act together to go find another place. And David's saying that, yeah, this isn't really happening. Well, guess what? It doesn't happen until it does. And when you step back again and you get a little bit of a satellite view, we're looking at Pacifica, we're looking at Half Moon Bay, we're looking at Ventura, and these are counties, coastal towns, municipalities, that nobody wanted to do that until they swooped in, and these are corporations. These are, I mean, this becomes the new low-hanging fruit. Go into those mobile home parks and just buy them out and then develop the hell out of them. And in what they ended up doing in Pacifica is they put a 2-year moratorium, the city of Pacifica, and that was the longest under the law they could get for those people to find other places so they could live. And the city was sad. They wished they could preserve that. And here, I don't know where it is. I know David knows because he quoted it to me one time, a long time ago. Under the general plan in the housing statutes, there is a regulation that says preserve mobile homes as an important source of affordable housing. And that's what I'm here to ask you to do today, please. And thank you so much for being here and doing this job and using, putting your brains together. Thank you.
May I ask you a quick question, ma'am?
Certainly.
Does it feel to you that this has been written by the lawyers of property owners?
This feels very park owner friendly, yes, everything in it. And I keep questioning, all of us do, why isn't it changing month after month after month? Why aren't changes being incorporated when they're being asked for?
And are you referring, when you say this, are you referring to the overlay or the closure ordinance, 2 separate ordinances?
Mainly the closure conversion, but also the overlay. The overlay is kind of new, and so we'd like to see it be more friendly. I have a dear concern regarding the, what do you call it, gateway. What's it called, the gateway? You don't call it a zone. You know what I'm talking about, where the
gateway
trailer
corridor
park is.
Yes.
That's now. That's what staff would like to have happen. Council hasn't voted it in, but staff may not be here forever. They could completely change. We could get a whole nother staff, and it might not ever happen. But those families, those residents in that park are here. And like I said, I've known at least one of them who's been there for 15 years. That's his life. That's the single greatest asset that person owns. He identifies himself as a resident there. And city staff could get offers of jobs elsewhere and move. They're not vested in that residence. They're vested in what can make them the best in their field, in their job. Well, those people's home is not a job. It's different. And so what's at stake is different. And what we're asking you, and what you're sort of tasked with, is to preserve these mobile home parks, like it says, as an important source of affordable housing. Oh, that's not it. I kind of have it memorized. And interestingly, it's in almost every single general plan in the housing element of every single municipality across the state. In 1999, when the state of California realized, our housing is like bad. It's such an overbalance of non-affordable housing and building starts that are unaffordable. We've got to do something. So that was one of the things they did, kind of amazingly, and Gizmo had a lot to do with that in legislation through Senator Connie Levya. So what we would like to see is look at what Jan and Linda Dirksen have prepared for you. They went and did all the research for you. And they are both college researchers. I mean, they are on an astute level. They did the research and looked across the state at what are the ordinances that protect residents in parks the best. And they gave them to you in the packets. Take a look. And our hope is that you will choose the ones that will protect us the best. Any more questions? Thank you again so much.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to address the commission on this? No? Okay, thank you. We'll close the public hearing, the public input portion of the hearing, and move on to commission deliberations.
Well, I do agree with her. I would like to see if a mobile home like Lazy J or whoever wants to convert it, there's not that big of a disincentive for them to do that. I would like to, it would be nice if that was beefed up so it's a little bit more painful for them to do that. I mean, when you run the numbers, it's really not that painful for them. So I would like to see that beefed up. Otherwise, that was my only real issue at the moment.
Another comment in it is it possible to give preference to people that are taken out of their house, instead of the 12-month thing, where they're helping them? Is it possible for them to get priority into an affordable housing unit that's available?
Like an existing affordable housing project that has a wait list and whatnot?
Correct, or a new one that's happening that will have a wait list or something as well.
Generally, priority is established on a first come, first served basis on those wait lists. And there's usually, there are very few situations where you can give priority or preference. Okay. And this would probably be one of them.
Well, reading the draft ordinance, it looks to me like it would take at least 18 months to begin to do the actual work on a conversion. So there'd actually be quite a bit of notice given to the residents about what was happening. I have to say that I feel a lot better about what we're voting on since I've seen the draft conversion ordinance. It probably doesn't satisfy the mobile home park residents, but it shows that there's some thought being given to protecting them to a certain extent. And as David says, it sets a very high bar for anybody who might be considering converting a mobile home park to have to comply with all these rules in the ordinance. Some of them are pretty, the way it's written, some of them are pretty open-ended, and I assume it would be up to the Planning Commission and the City Council to decide whether or not the particular project developer has complied with the requirements of the ordinance. And to a certain extent, it's a leap of faith that in the future, if it ever happened, that whoever's on the Planning Commission and the City Council will look at these things very carefully. But I do have a practical question, and that is, we're not really, we don't have any authority to review the ordinance. That's the City Council. All we're looking at is the ordinance that creates the mobile home park overlay zone. My question is, because the ordinance that creates the overlay zone requires a developer to comply with the ordinance, and the ordinance is not in existence yet. On a practical basis, how will that work? Would the council somehow condition it so that they both came into effect at the same time?
Yeah, the council is going to review both these ordinances simultaneously. In fact, the intent at this point is that they would be considering both ordinances at their next hearing on the 16th. That's when the October 2nd meeting was continued to.
For clarity, ordinance 1515 you're talking about?
Both ordinance 1515 and ordinance XXXX are up for review, and it'll have a number by then.
Thank you.
By the City Council at their next hearing. because of the extensive community dialogue on Ordinance 1515, as was identified tonight, that there have been several requests made by the public and some information gathering that the council asked of staff. No changes to 1515 have been made yet. We don't have firm direction to do so, but we were asked to gather some information, bring that information back. And so I don't anticipate that the city council is going to introduce and adopt those ordinances or introduce those ordinances at their next meeting. And if there were any time delay for ordinance 1515, if it lagged behind this ordinance that you're considering, we're still under the moratorium period. So that moratorium won't be lifted until both of these ordinances are until one of two things happens. Either both of these ordinances are in place and then the council affirmatively lifts that moratorium, or the timeframes expire and we have not addressed the the issues that required the moratorium. So yeah, they're going to look at them simultaneously, and the plan is that they'll both be in effect at the same time.
I have another question, kind of what John was saying, oh, they have 18 months to find a new place, the owners. And it's like, well, if you're a senior, not a lot's going to change with your income in 18 months. Everything's still going to be the same. But then what happens to those people who got loans against their property? I mean, they're not just, they're renting the land, but they own the structure. It's like, who's going to pay that off? And I just don't understand how it's all going to work. So what would happen if, say, for example, the owners of Lazy J came in and said, everybody get out, or I'm going to convert it to apartment buildings or whatever. How exactly is that going to work? I mean, I know that's a long story, but if you can condense that down, like what happens to everybody?
No, those are really good and relevant questions. I think the issues that were brought up by the public tonight related to the in-place value are important questions. The conversion report takes all of that into consideration in the report, and the council needs to understand the true impact on the residents, financial impact of doing the conversion before they make a decision. So that conversion impact report, which is the requirements start on packet page 20 under ordinance 1515, requires that they identify, all kinds of detail about all of not only the spaces but each of the buildings and mobile homes that are on the site. They have to account for, or provide information, contact information for all of those residents. They have to identify comparable mobile home parks. This is going to be one of the hardest thresholds for them to clear, is that there aren't any available mobile home parks. All of the mobile home parks are full. So certainly if a smaller mobile home park closed, they'd have an easier time of trying to find relocation. But if Lazy J, for example, were to close, it'd be almost impossible for them to relocate people. Purchase price, so on and so forth. And there are different relocation benefits afforded depending on whether or not the mobile home can be moved and whether there's a place to move it. Ultimately, the findings that are found on page 19 in that ordinance 1515, they have to identify that the conversion impact report was complete and it provided adequate information for the impacts of the park conversion in terms of disruption to affected residents and the methods available for addressing relocation needs. That there will exist at the time of the conversion use sufficient numbers available mobile lots within Humboldt County to accommodate the mobile homes to be displaced, or that relocation plan adequately enables displaced renters to obtain other adequate housing to the extent permitted by law, that adequate options are available for renters who would be disrupted by the conversion, that the relocation plan provides for reasonable costs of relocation based on the findings of the conversion impact report, that if it's proposed for another residential use, whether the residents of the mobile home park will have an opportunity to purchase it for sale or rent in the new units, and whether the construction schedule will result in unreasonably long-term displacements, whether the proposed conversion will not be detrimental to public health and safety and general welfare. The conversion is consistent with the city's general plan, including the housing element and its implementation of locally adopted state affordable housing preservation goals. So there are several hooks in there that give the, I think as Commissioner Barstow pointed out, council a lot of discretion to find that the impact to the residents is too great to warrant that conversion, without reasonable and meaningful, benefits. Again, this is these two ordinances are, partner ordinances with the intent to create disincentive from converting the mobile home park. This is explicitly adopted to preserve mobile home parks and the mobile home units.
David, do you know how long these ordinances have been in place within the state of California?
I can't answer that exactly, but I can tell you that there are ordinances similar to these all up and down the state. And they've
Fairly
been
new. Are they the last 10 years or something, 20 years?
No, and actually Hillary might, she left the room. She might be able to fact check me on this, but I think we're talking like 20 and 30 years, some of them.
And do we know whether or not some of these places that were identified that have pursued closures and conversions, whether or not these ordinances were in place within those municipalities?
This has been a, the history on mobile home park protections has been a sort of an arms race, is how I would describe it. The comments made tonight are, pretty accurate, especially in other parts of the state where, the parks are bought on speculation. And the intention of that new purchaser is to, evict everyone and then convert it to some other use, or the intention of that in, places like Pacifica and Marina that were listed, the intention is to come in and raise the rents because it's prime real estate. Some of these mobile home parks are parked right across the street from the beach. So it's, prime real estate, but the people who are living there, are still low-income residents. And so that was kind of the move for this. And so as one ordinance was adopted, there were legal challenges or, other loopholes that were created. And so it's been a refining process over the years. And the closure and conversion was an attempt to combat the park owners' attempts to avoid the rent stabilization ordinances that were being adopted by just simply closing the park and converting it to a completely different use, or turning it into condos, condoing the park.
Also, can you tell us where the bulk language from this ordinance came from?
The overlay ordinance? Mm-hmm. I drafted it entirely from scratch based on other overlay ordinances that we have for similar purposes. You identify a use that's designed or intended to either be exclusive for that particular place or for that particular geography. And I attempted to add additional findings that would be required above and beyond the the standard requirements for changing a zone. And certainly if there are other findings that you'd recommend, I think that the council would be open to those. Certainly, as Commissioner Visade-Elcock pointed out, if you have a recommendation for amending the percentage of replacement housing, those items are up and available for amendment.
Has the ordinance evolved much since you originally put it out to the council and to us?
The overlay ordinance has only had minor corrections and additions that were asked of the public. That one hasn't changed much. Ordinance 1515 is largely the format that it was in when it was originally presented to the council. At the couple of hearings that we had on that ordinance with the council, they asked for staff to bring back additional information about, for instance, relocation benefit. And so we're still working on information for the council before they give us ultimate direction as to how to modify or whether to modify that ordinance.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
I guess the one last thing I would mention about the 15% is that, some folks have pointed out that, for Arcata Trailer Court, I don't know the numbers there. I don't know this is, in fact, factual, but let's assume that it is for the moment, that it's only 3 that would be required at 15%. For some of the larger parks, that would translate into, a much larger number, up to, 30, 40 units. Some of our housing units, our affordable housing units they hope to get that big. So that could mean that somebody is paying for an entire affordable housing project. So just to, kind of make that tangible for you, the Arcata Bay Crossing project, we estimated was somewhere in the neighborhood of $125,000 a unit times 40 units. So this may not be a huge disincentive when you think about the Arcata Trailer Court, and so this may be another reason to point to John's question, well, what's the practical impact? For Arcata Trailer Court, it's neither here nor there. If we say it's $100,000 per unit and I give you $300,000 and I walk and I get to go do something different, to convert one of the other parks, it's a pretty significant investment in order to meet that 15% threshold. And so modifying that threshold, and again, I don't know if it's even a legal finding that or a requirement that we can make in this, but modifying that threshold and saying something like 50%, that would be, orders of magnitude larger than any housing development project we've ever done in the city of Arcata, and orders of magnitude larger than any we will likely ever do in terms of a complete 100% build out for an affordable housing project.
In terms of location, I know that this recent infill project, part of the grant dollars and state support were based on its proximity to downtown and transportation hubs. Do the trailer parks generally fit that model anyway? I mean, location-wise?
No, I mean the majority of the trailer park and mobile home park is what you're referring to they're located, near Valley West, up in the northern end of town, and there's not a whole lot of alternative transportation infrastructure there. There is a bus that passes through Giantoli and down James Road, so it passes by the majority of the these mobile home parks. But again, our bus system is, it could be more efficient if that was your sole source of transportation.
I had a quick question. So 1515 is not going to come in front of us then, right? It's just going to the city council?
1515?
Yeah.
It's included in your package tonight? That's correct. I mean, I provided it here for reference so you could see, I think to Commissioner Visade-Alcock's point that we don't have this in front of us and we're relying on it to make decisions about this ordinance, and so that's why it's in your packet tonight.
Right.
But I explicitly asked the council to address whether or not they wanted you to review ordinance 1515, and they said no. Whether they change their mind as we go through the process and we bring it back to them, it's to their discretion.
And here's another question, but this one is a little crazy. Are there cities that have done or that have tried to do vertical at all in terms of the mobile home parks?
I'm sorry.
Are there places where mobile home park owners have tried to go vertical, have tried to, stack them with some infrastructure or something like that? I don't know. I'm not suggesting, and I'm just saying, is that a loophole people are going to try in the future?
I'm not aware of any, but I'd love to see that.
Yeah, right.
It's akin to, kind of a concept that we have seen. This has been done, I know, at least in England, where they've taken storage containers and converted them for, basically micro units, and then they bolt those to a foundation and they bolt them together. I know they've used that kind of housing in Louisiana after Katrina as well to replace, do quick replacement for some housing units. So it's a possibility.
Julie? Sure. If there's any other questions or deliberations, otherwise a motion is welcome.
I'll make a motion to adopt Resolution PC 19-05, recommending to the City Council amend the land use code. Is that it?
Sure. Do we have a second on that?
I was just seeing if there was any more discussion about changing that second number higher than 15%. I don't know how others felt about that, but I thought it could be considered.
Well, this is the time.
Do you want to? Look at that? We're just recommending it.
Yeah, I mean, this,
It's our chance.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mike, do you have some input or discussion on that?
One thing you could consider, because I've heard this sort of filter around amongst the different commissioners, is kind of trying to figure out a way that you could raise the number potentially for Arcata Trailer Court if it were included, or for some of the smaller parks. If you wanted to, you could put a lower limit, so 15% or 20 units or something like that. 20 units would represent a fairly substantial affordable housing project. And you could set that as a floor or a ceiling, I don't, either one.
So 15% not to exceed 20 units, is that roughly what
Or
you're saying?
15%, but not less than 20.
Not less than 20, okay. Which means Arcata Trailer Park would have to be full-on low-income housing. Yeah. Yep.
I guess I was thinking more as a disincentive for the larger folks. I understand that this could, if you have 200 spaces, this would mean, 30 spots or 30, equivalents. So that's a lot, but it's also, you could be talking about very big investors where it's still very feasible. So I was thinking maybe closer to 20%, but I don't know how the rest of you guys feel about that, or if that's, I see a head shaking down there.
Too low.
John, any input?
Well, we're just making a recommendation. It's not really attached to the consideration of the overlay ordinance, but we can, I guess we can just pass it along, and I would support raising that percentage also. And I think there was the city council, some of the council members, I think, were leaning that way also.
And I was just wondering, since it is just recommendation, could we possibly recommend strengthening the relocation assistant programs as well?
You're not making a recommendation on ordinance 1515 at this point.
Okay. So we don't get to do anything with that.
But David, we could slide in the recommendation on increasing the 15% to 20% or no less than 20 units.
Because that is this combining zone ordinance that will.
Yeah, that would be on packet page 9.
D2.
Item D2 would read, replacement housing totaling 20% of the total spaces, comma, or not fewer than 20, or let's see, replacement housing totaling 20% of the total spaces converted are included for low-income residents in a new housing project on the subject site. Give me a moment to figure out where to best plug that in. 20% total spaces.
Not in this one.
Okay, here we are. Replacement housing totaling 20% of the total spaces, comma, but not fewer than 20 units, comma, converted are included for low-income residents, and then placing that same language in the calculated total of 20% of the converted spaces, but not fewer than 20 units total, comma, by the per unit replacement value.
So that seems a bit heavy-handed, the 20. And if the Arcata Trailer Court were added to the list of mobile home park overlays, that would pretty much wipe out the possibility of converting that.
Unless it was converted for a low-income infill project similar to the recently presented one, which location-wise doesn't seem like it would be a stretch in terms of proximity to downtown and all that.
I think the areas where, I mean, since Arcata Trailer Court isn't included in this ordinance, the areas where this might be effective is if a park tried to convert a portion of its land base and, say took, 50 units and wanted to drop those out, do a lot line adjustment, drop those out and convert it to a, residential subdivision, let's say, then this would, create that fairly substantial disincentive from doing sort of smaller sub-conversions, if you will, for those units that are those parks that are subject to the requirement.
Unless some of those units in that subdivision were this type of housing, right? No, the conversion would still require, it would be above and beyond. So this, even if a project proponent came in and said, hey, look, I want to convert this park, I'm going to create 50% low-income housing and 50% market rate housing, and I'm going to include all of the units that are in mobile home as part of that 50% low-income housing. So you get a 100% replacement of mobile home units for affordable housing through this project. There's still going to be a disconnect in the time frame. So all of the people who are living there now have to be relocated. They're not going to be living in that. And so you still want to have this land use regulation gives an additional disincentive above and beyond the closure and conversion ordinance to those closures or conversions. So is that a good thing from a housing perspective? Because then that could be a disincentive for more affordable housing.
I think that, that is, you're walking a fine line when it comes to replacing housing that's already affordable. And, in particular, if there's a, project that came in that was really, met the intent of, creating affordable housing, had a really good relocation plan and so on and so forth, there is a pathway for the city to approve it. It still would require a conversion report. It still would require that they meet this. If in that case, on that outside chance, you want to allow for, more flexibility, you could consider making that recommendation. I think it starts, the ordinance starts to get overly complex at some point in trying to accommodate situations that we don't know. They're completely speculative whether they'd ever come to fruition.
I think I would, just based on that, I would feel a little more comfortable just doing the 20% and not doing the floor as well. But, I'm up to everybody else too.
All right, any thoughts?
Can you read back what that would sound like?
Replacement housing totaling 20% of the total spaces converted are included for low-income residents in new housing project on the subject site, or an in lieu fee determined by multiplying the calculated total of 20% of the converted spaces by the per unit replacement value using the most recent affordable housing project built in the city, valuation adjusted for inflation. And I'm going to ask that you insert a comma after city in that sentence I just read. The in lieu fee must be deposited in a restricted city account to build affordable housing.
I think that would be great.
I'll second that.
So we have a motion and a second, including the change language. All in favor of this, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay,
Thank you.
yes. Thank you all for coming tonight and for your input on this important topic.
It will go before, might want to tell him, you might want to tell him it'll go before the city council.
So this will be before the city council on the 16th of this month, including the ordinances.
The conversion.
Okay, so. We will move on to our housing element vacant sites inventory policy and implementation measure review.
Good evening. No, I can find it. Tonight's agenda item will focus on the draft vacant sites inventory and revisions to the policies and implementation measures. Staff anticipates direction from the commission. I know at the last planning commission meeting, David brought some of the information regarding our arena numbers and talked to you about some of the public engagement that we've been engaging in regards to our housing element. So tonight we'd like to talk about the vacant sites inventory and go over some of that information and get some feedback on some of our implementation measures and what we're looking at there. A lot of the information that we've been going through has been updating. We are working with a consultant on this project, and so going back and forth with the consultant and determining that the vacant sites that they're seeing that we've pulled from GIS are in fact vacant. So there's been a lot of back and forth, and so there's some changes. I think I gave you each a change to the table 2. So I'm going to pull that up. Let's see. Oh, nope, that's the implementation measures. And I'm sorry, I have a cold, so my voice is not carrying very well. Nope. I'll find it eventually. There we go. So the state requires that the city demonstrate in our housing element enough properly zoned sites to allow build out for our arena, which was table 1 in your packets. I'm not going to go into great detail about that because I think that you've all read that, and that's the information that's there on under C, arena. Those are the categories: the very low, low, moderate, and above moderate, and 610 units is our total. The city must provide an inventory of those sites, and staff, like I said, has currently been analyzing the inventory with our consultant, and the draft inventory is what we would like to discuss today. And we attached a longer inventory for you as well to the staff report, so I think you all got that. It's attachment A. We won't go into that into too much detail unless you would like to. We can open up the GIS and kind of look at some of those sites. But what I really wanted to express is that the inventory must demonstrate that there are adequate sites for that arena, and we have to go into the level of each income category. So that's something new to this housing element cycle. The city's not only required to provide an inventory of adequate sites, but we also have to indicate on those sites inventory which parcels are suitable for each income category. Really specifically, for our very low and low income categories, there's a lot of restrictions on what sites can be counted for those 2 categories. Makes it a little more difficult than in past housing element cycles. So unlike past housing element cycles, the city is required to ensure that those sites designated for lower income housing actually produce affordable housing. So if moderate housing is produced on those sites, we actually have to redesignate, upzone, or otherwise provide a new site to replace those lost units. So on our new annual progress reports, we're actually going to have to keep track of the sites that we identify for affordable housing in this housing element cycle and identify additional sites that are available if in fact those get developed for moderate income or above moderate income and don't get developed for low income housing development. So we need to be careful with that as well. Since the staff report was submitted, these have been updated. We went back and forth, like I said, with our consultant and looked at the vacant inventory a little bit more in depth. I think that we're still going to be doing some of that. I don't think that this is the final by any means, so I just want to give you what we've got currently Go ahead.
Just a quick, so what you just said earlier, so if something goes to moderate, say, and you had it and that was zoned something, then you have to find a replacement for it?
Exactly.
Okay. And that has to happen every year?
Well, we have to identify every single year on our annual performance report. It's only for, yeah, this is only for the low and very low income category. So if, for instance, we designated something above moderate and it got developed for moderate, we wouldn't have to do the same thing for those two categories. It's just for the low and very low income categories. So what we identify in our sites inventory for those two categories, if something gets developed that is not in those two categories, then we have to go back and provide the state with what our alternative is going to be for that.
And just like big picture here, in general, for someone who's a developer, for businesses that are developers, unless you're have a specialty in the lower income housing, I assume it's more profitable and easier to do the moderate and above. Is that correct, or is that wrong?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Are you asking if it's more profitable to do lower income housing?
Right, and no, I'm assuming it's not. I'm assuming it's not unless you're really dialed in, you're a bigger player that's dialed in with all different funding and everything, that the financial incentives are generally towards doing stuff that's moderate and higher.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to take the opportunity to put a shout out to the building community out there. If you want to come work with us on affordable housing, we will work with you. So to address your question, yeah, it's a new ball of wax that you'd have to learn, but we'll help you learn it. And we're willing to work with as many players who are interested in building affordable housing in our community. We'll work with them to secure grant funds to assist with that if that's what it takes.
Can I ask a little clarification here? Looking at table 2, so you're identifying parcels targeted for low and very low income projects, is that correct?
Yes.
So that has something to do with the neighborhood, or how do you do that?
So there's some restrictions. There's new government code requirements which limit what parcels can be allocated for lower income. And so some of the things that have come up is the default density requirement of 10 units per acre. So that's one of the things. A requirement that the site be at least a half an acre, but not more than 10 acres. 50% of the lower income allocation must be designated to vacant sites unless there is substantial evidence, and by that they mean a letter from the property owner that they intend to develop it as affordable housing, so pretty substantial evidence that existing use on a non-vacant site does not constitute an issue with residential development for affordable housing. And then if the vacant sites were to be identified in 2 or more consecutive housing elements, which ours have been, and they're being included in this current housing element to meet the lower income allocation, then a program that allows by right approval for housing developments that designate at least 20% of the units as lower income must be included in the housing element. So we are in, based on what we've been able to pull up, we are actually in that boat. So that is something that we're going to have to identify in our housing element as a program or an implementation measure.
So if you look at the table under the very low and low income rows, what's identified in our vacant inventory column under column D, those are the approximate 2 sites. It's about 2 sites that meet those qualifications to be counted in very low and low income. A total of 2 parcels in the entire city of Arcata.
There are these 2 right here that are on the spreadsheet that you guys have.
Do you have a map that could be up that shows some of this?
Unfortunately, we don't have a map right now that shows all of this. We're working on that right now with our consultant. Our GIS has been down for the last day, and so we were trying to get that prepared before this meeting, and unfortunately weren't able to. We will likely bring that to the next meeting, though, so that would give you a little more clarification. I think it would be helpful.
And those 2 sites total 23 units then?
23 units for each category, so about 50 units, yeah.
And the 10 per, sorry, the 10 per acre, was it? Mm-hmm. That's a minimum or a maximum?
They require, that's the default density requirement. I don't know if there's...
Yeah, so what that translates into for Arcata, as you can see in the table, is that we're really only talking residential medium and residential high zoning districts. So you have to be residential medium at least, you have to be between 5 and 10 acres, and you have to be vacant. And what they mean by vacant is vacant, like nothing on it. If it has a shed built on it, they wouldn't consider it vacant.
Parking lot, nothing.
You said 5 and 10 acres?
Between 0.5 and 10, sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you for the correction. We had produced 43 units, which you see in the project's building permits issued between January and October. So we're able to reduce our RENA allocation by both those vacant inventories and those sites that were built out. And Jen can tell you which projects those were.
Yeah, so that's the Isaacson's project, the affordable, the 20 and the 23 are Isaacson's, and then you'll see in the next column F, that's projects, that's the Creekside annexation project, so that's what's anticipated there. They also have a 100-bed facility that can't be counted because it's a group facility, so I think it's for dementia care. And so that can't be counted in our, unfortunately can't be counted as part of our RENA numbers. And then we have the projected ADUs, and that's based on what we've currently been producing and I think it's actually fairly low. I think that's an attainable number for ADUs. We've been doing more than 10 per year. That's what we calculated was about 10 per year. We've had years that have been slim, but we've definitely amped that up, and we're really working towards some different programs, which I think that we'll go into a little bit later on, implementation measures that would increase the ADU. It would increase the accessibility of people to be able to build ADUs. We're looking at an ADU financing program, so that's one of the things that we've been talking about to kind of get more ADUs built, because that is a good way to develop somewhat affordable, although most likely not be able to count it as low income because it's not restricted, so.
So what were you saying about counting the same property you can only count it for 2 years? And what if you have it available and it just doesn't get developed? You can't keep including that?
Exactly.
The state had a lot of jurisdictions that had policies that were actually obstructing development, and they had vacant lands. And so the state was seeing the same parcels come from these jurisdictions year after year after year. And so they made this requirement to try and prevent that happening and make those jurisdictions get serious about producing housing. The problem is that it's got a double-edged sword. These are our 2 sites that we can produce 46 units on. If we don't build them, we get penalized because they fall off our inventory. We can't use them anymore. If they do build them, we can't use them because they're built out and we need to go find new ones. So the state is basically throwing down the gauntlet and saying, you all are going to have to get serious about actually meeting your regional housing needs allocation. You recall from our last presentation, over the past several cycles since 2003, the city has done fairly well, I would say, and we produced 70% of our RENA allocation. Many jurisdictions didn't even get close to that. I think I said last time that the majority of that housing was built in the low and very low income categories, and we've since, I think, maybe moderated that statement. I think Jen's done some additional research.
I've done a little research, and we've developed a lot in the moderate income category. The most that we've developed has been in the moderate income category, although we did do very well in our low and very low. We did the least in our above moderate.
So I stand corrected on that, but the bottom line is that we're still not meeting our RENA allocations for low income, and there are additional requirements for low income.
Jennifer, is most of that development apartments?
Yes, most of our affordable housing development is multifamily apartments.
Affordable, what about moderate?
Moderate income?
I mean, you said most of the
Yes.
development's been moderate, but that's still apartments, right?
Yes, it's apartments and ADUs. So all of our ADUs are considered moderate, and so any of our ADU development, but the majority is apartments, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions on the sites inventory for now? There'll be more updates to this coming, and this is just the vacant sites inventory. So we are going to be looking at non-vacant sites and underutilized sites and seeing what we can get as far as inventory there. I think you're going to see some changes in, David and I kind of identified that we think that there's some changes here. So we're actually looking at about 0 here as opposed to negative 27. I think this is actually a little high. So I think that's one thing that may change coming up once we actually get a chance to delve into it a little deeper. And now that our GIS is back up and working and we can actually look at some of these, it'll give us a little more clarity, I think. So The next thing, if there's no more questions on the site inventory, the next thing that I wanted to bring up and that we wanted to go through is our implementation measures. And I gave each of you, you've had a chance to look at the previous housing elements implementation measures that were included as attachment B, correct? I went into depth on those. Okay. Let's see if I can pull up. It looks like this. This is the attachment B. So I've created this spreadsheet, which is a little difficult to see on the screen. I'll try and increase it. My eyes get bad at night, so. It basically goes through each of the housing element implementation measures and discusses whether or not we're going to continue to include them or we're going to recommend that we remove them. Our objective with this is not to increase the number of implementation measures because, to be quite honest, some of the implementation measures that were in our previous housing element may not have actually been useful or were maybe just in there because it was required. So we're going back through and we're really trying to determine what needs to be in there and what's going to be effective for the current housing element, what's actually going to help us implement the development of housing. So when we looked through Housing Element 1 design manuals, that's one that we decided that we were going to be removing. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to jump in real quick and say that we organize these in advance, and unfortunately not in advance if you're receiving the packet, but to try and just go through them really quickly and organize the topic of conversation. So we're going to skip over the ones that say delete and get straight to the ones where we've recommended a modification or a continuation. And what we're looking for is for you to provide feedback and input on this. If you're looking at the ones that say delete and you want to find out a little more information as to why we are recommending deleting them, then feel free to ask and we'll go over those. But we recognize it's 8 o'clock and we want to be able to get you out of here timely. Sorry.
That's okay. No, that's great. So if we go down to Housing Element 3, Housing Inspection and Code Enforcement Program, we're recommending that we modify that. That's something that the building department is currently working on. They may actually have this in place before the housing element gets finalized, in which case we would likely recommend that we delete that as well because it's already in place. And jump in if you have questions on any of these as I go down. Housing Element 4, we're looking at continuing that. That's the Housing Rehabilitation Program. We don't currently run one, but I think that that would be something we would want to continue or try and find funding for. Housing Element 5, Persons with Disabilities Access. Of course, we do want to continue that. Jumping down to Housing Element 8, Residential Site Development Program. We are looking at potentially modifying that, and that I think is something that we've identified might be included in the infill plan, which will be something that's that we're recommending be included in this as well. Housing Element 10, Infill Development Program, similar with Housing Element 8. It's going to be a portion of our infill, so that's something that we're probably going to be combining. Housing Element 11, Mixed Use, we're looking at continuing that. It may also be combined into the infill plan in some way. Housing Element 12, Development Processing System Review Program, we're looking at continuing that. Housing Element 13, Additional Living Space in the RVL and RL zones, we're looking at modifying that. That's actually something that the state may be doing for us to allow a third unit. We were talking about doing a program for that, but thanks, Joe. But we may not need to because that may actually be resolved from the state level, so that may be deleted as well. Housing 14, Affordable Housing Preservation, we're looking at modifying that but continuing it. Then we jump down to Housing Element 18, State and Federal Grant Seeking, we're going to be continuing that, of course. Housing Element 20, Inclusionary Requirements for Affordable Housing Development, we're looking at modifying that, try and make it actually work. Housing Element 22, Community Land Trust. We're looking to modify that we continue to support the Community Land Trust, not that there necessarily will be new Community Land Trusts developments created. Housing Element 23, Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We may modify or delete this. This is something that we're going to need to review a little further. Housing Element 24, Mobile Home Park Preservation. Obviously, we're going to be continuing that. Housing Element 26, Housing Development for Seniors. Again, continuing that. Housing Element 28, Residential Relocation and Anti-Displacement Program. We're looking at modifying that or potentially deleting it, depending on what we find with our research there. Housing Element 29, Housing Discrimination and Housing Equal Opportunity. We're looking to modify that. Housing Element 32, 33, and 34. I'm just going to address all of those together. They all are related to energy conservation, green and alternative building guidelines, and some of these are things that are already completed, already regulations, so there's already programs and provisions in place for those three. So it is likely that those three will all be deleted, but if we do need to keep any for any specific reason, we may. So I just wanted to put that they may be modified. Housing Element 35, HSU Master Planning, we are looking at deleting that. And then Housing Element 36, Regional Housing Needs Process, that's something that is mandated. We're going to continue to do it. There's no reason to have it in here as an implementation. There's nothing really that makes that an implementation measure specifically. So that was my quick rundown.
That was very quick. Can I ask if there's pushback from the city on the RENA numbers? 610 just sounds like a lot. And it seems like we're always struggling to meet that number. And who, I think you told us last time who set that up, but does it go back and forth a little bit? Or?
It does. There's a little bit of wiggle room, and we have sometimes successfully pushed back on this number. The way that the process works is that the Housing Community Development, State HCD, works with Department of Finance and develops population growth projections for every jurisdiction throughout the state. And they then work with the COG or whatever the regional planning organization is in jurisdictions. Generally, it's a council of an association of governments. That they give them the number, and then there's a little bit of there's a statutory time frame where they can contest the number, provide local information to help work on that number a little bit, and we did that this time. It reduced the number modestly for the region as a whole. Where this HE36 that we're recommending deleting came from was a couple of housing element cycles ago. This process was significantly mismanaged, and it took the various jurisdictions within the county stepping in and forcing the issue to ensure that we would receive a RENA in time for us to complete our housing elements timely and get certified. We're still participating in that process. HCOG is very open. Marcella, the ED, and I'm sure the organization as a whole has really changed its culture and is open and inclusive and works with us early. So we don't need that element anymore, but we do continue to work every housing element cycle to make sure that we're addressing those regional needs. We did bring the recommendation to, I believe we brought it to the Planning Commission and the City Council. Ultimately, the City Council supported the COG's proposal, which was a 50-50 housing balance. So part of the RENA process is intended to ensure that, number one, that all income categories are spread throughout the entire county. So you don't just have like one area that takes all the low income and one area that takes all the high income. And the second objective is to, among other things, balance jobs and housing to ensure that there's adequate housing provided near centers of industry or other jobs. The allocation this time, 610, it does seem like a lot. Last housing element cycle, we got 810. The difference is that this is actually a 4-year, those were 4-year cycles, and this is an 8-year cycle. So it's equivalent to getting 305 in past housing element cycles. It's not too bad. It's not far off from the population projections that we've made locally here, and it's approximately reflects about a 0.5% population growth. We typically use 1% population growth as a rule of thumb for estimating future population. So this time around, it was fairly reasonable. Hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. And it's hard to imagine, a couple of decades out how this is going to look, but I guess we just keep rezoning and going more vertical.
Yeah, the hope is that we'll be able to establish a plan now that will accommodate the next 20 years worth of plan development as we're going through and updating our general plan, not just our housing element. So our housing element looks out 8 years, our general plan is going to look out 20. And if we plan it right, we will really concentrate that development in areas that, it makes the most sense to do so.
Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Is that it?
I just thought that it was really interesting how the moderate and above moderate, right, where we've got it, looks like we're thinking we're going to be way ahead as opposed to the other two, and that's the nature of just how housing has been in Arcata compared to other communities. Is that it? I wonder how, it'd be interesting to see how the other communities, like we're talking about, like McKinleyville or Eureka, compare on that front as well.
I would say it's not necessarily completely based on the nature of how housing has been developed here in Arcata historically, because we've done the best in the low and moderate income categories as opposed to the above moderate. I think part of this is based on those vacant sites inventory and what can and can't be counted for lower income categories. So that's the thing that I would say, looking at this in my view, is not necessarily that's what's historically been created. We've actually done worse in the above moderate category than we did in the low and moderate. So it's really a factor of the vacant inventory sites and what's available there and what we can count towards the low and very low and unfortunately what we can't.
So historically, we've trended towards building more of the lower income?
More of the moderate and low income categories is where we've done the best, looking back at the last two housing element cycles.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Anything else? And are you done with that whole item?
The only other thing that I had is that I did do an attachment C. I don't know if you had a chance to look at the attachment C. We did a little brainstorming with staff, and we're working on developing implementation measures, like I said, that will actually implement our housing element and hopefully develop the housing that we're required to develop. And so if you just take a look at attachment C, I don't think I'll go through all of these. I think there's still some questions about the different goals and whether or not these are still the goals that we want to continue with. I think some of them definitely we do, but I think that I just wanted to kind of give you some information, which we'll bring these back, I think, a little more refined, potentially at the next meeting. But I just wanted to give you an update on some of the things that we've been thinking about. A lot of it is related to infill, but there are a few other things on here. For instance, under the affordable housing, we would want to identify that we support the repeal of Article 34 of the state constitution, which a lot of other jurisdictions are having issues with too, where I don't know if you're that familiar with Article 34, but we come up against this currently with our affordable housing when we're applying for grants. There's only, is it 5%, David? So 5% of your total housing can be developed for affordable housing, and we're right at that threshold now. So we're within, I think, 50 units of it, which is concerning considering that we're required with our RENA numbers to create, over 200 units. So that's one of the things that I think is interesting on here. We also want to look at some ADU financing programs, like I had mentioned. But yeah, so there's a lot of different ideas on this sheet that we'll be trying to look at how we can incorporate those into some of the current implementation measures. Because again, we don't want to create a whole host of additional implementation measures. We'd like to keep it to some really focused, targeted implementation measures that actually can perform. So.
I think the other important piece to that is that the state is ratcheting up its requirements that you actually perform. And so if you have an implementation measure, they want to know, what are you doing on it? And I can tell you, just historically, we get these implementation measures. We either don't end up funding some of them. They sound like good ideas, but they're aspirational. There's something we want to do. But if we put something aspirational on here that we're not actually going to do, we're going to be required to report on it. And if we're not performing, there are going to be penalties for not performing. So this is really intended to be, as Jen said, it was our brainstorming. It's intended to be a seed for ideas for you to direct staff as to policy development that we should be considering. It's quite possible that none of these end up in the housing element ultimately. We're working with our consultant to provide advice to us on what is legally required to be in the housing element. But it could be that we take some of these great ideas and ideas that have yet to be formed and include them into other elements in the general plan. So if you have anything you want to discuss on these now, I think it'd be good to.
Can you just explain to me what the airspace subdivision over city-owned property is? That sounds really great. I don't know what that is.
All right, we're calling this the Brian Heat and Eureka Special. And it's something that's identified in their housing element, and we actually thought it was really interesting. So their concept is that you would take like a city-owned parking lot. They have more of these than we do. Obviously, we don't have a ton, but you would take something like that, a city-owned parking lot, and you would sell the airspace above that parking lot to a developer to develop affordable housing or mixed-use housing, whatever the case may be. Leave the parking lot for parking underneath and build above it. So that's.
So we have 2 parking spaces right out here. That would be perfect.
We do. We do have some. We don't have as many as
I'm
Eureka.
just saying.
We did steal that idea, so I need to give credit.
I love that.
To Eureka for that.
And the parking would not be for what's going on upstairs. The parking lot would stay the same civic usage that it is today.
Exactly.
Probably.
Exactly. And I think that the idea there would be that they're efficiency units, they're close to downtown, they're close to transit. Yeah, so they wouldn't require parking.
Great. Exciting stuff. Anything else? Anything else from you guys? No? Okay. Correspondence and communications. Nothing?
No, I do have a correspondence actually. PG&E had released information earlier today that they were potentially considering a shutdown of this area's electric. We've since received confirmation that that is in fact going to happen, and so they're going to be turning the power off tonight at 9. I don't have the details. The information I got from PG&E was a little vague, that they'd be shutting the power down for tomorrow, they said, which I believe means that they'll start at 12 tonight. There's a URL that they say to follow. So look for that in your email or however you receive correspondence from PG&E to find out more information on that. But everybody should be planning for a temporary shutdown of power. I don't want to cause widespread panic, and I'm glad your microphone was off when you said that. We don't know for how long the power outage will be.
Yeah. Go buy blocks of ice.
You know it would be widespread panic because they're watching the Planning Commission meeting.
Yeah. When we go out of the building and we see everybody running to the ice market.
The other announcement I have for the Planning Commission is that the Institute of Local Government has selected the City of Arcata to participate in the BOOST program, an acronym for which I have no lengthy name. Jen might be able to help you with that. But essentially what it is it's technical assistance, and the ILG works with the League of Cities to provide technical assistance through this BOOST program for jurisdictions that are doing innovative planning work, and to assist them in obtaining their objectives, and in particular with an emphasis on public outreach and engagement. And so Jen and Dilo and Willa from our office went down a couple of weeks ago to receive some training in San Diego. And that same portions of that same team are coming up this month on the 23rd. We're going to try and spread that out to more city departments and get as much as we can out of that training. But it's really exciting. I think that, you know, we've seen a number of instances recently, whether it's this invitation from the ILG to participate in this program, or statements that the Department of Conservation, who we recently applied for a Prop 68 grant, and honestly, because it seemed at the time kind of tangential to the work we were doing on the infill program, we felt we probably had pretty low odds of winning it, but it, you know, we seemed to hit some project areas. We made a compelling application. We're awarded that Prop 68 funding. And when the grant manager called to inform me that we were awarded, we received some pretty significant praise that the city of Arcata is doing some very innovative, you know, planning work. That this project, we ranked out of a significantly oversubscribed grant application, we ranked second in their ranking, and they told us that they were thrilled to be able to offer us the grant. They said the one caveat was that the sustainable agricultural lands, conservation lands, sustainable agricultural lands conservation grant application that we had made with the Department of Conservation weeks after we submitted for Prop 68, if we were awarded that grant, that we'd have to give the Prop 68 funds back. And they seemed, you know, they said obviously they, you know, couldn't review or tell us anything about that grant application, but they're fairly similar. I feel pretty good about it. So I just wanted to toot our own horn a little bit. Staff has been, in the Community Development Department in particular, has been working at breakneck speed. Sometimes we lose sight of the good work that we are doing, in particular when, you know, a lot of the work that we do is, you know, I mean, it's contentious. The Community Development Department is contentious. So I just wanted to take a moment to, you know, recognize ourselves to the Planning Commission that we're doing good work, darn it. And that goes for every single community development staff member.
Well, congratulations, and thank you for that update. And with that, we will adjourn.